The Johnson family had a Sunday night tradition that they held close to their hearts. Every week, after a long and tiring few days of work and school, Michael, Emma, and their 6-year-old daughter Sophie would visit Sonny's Diner, a cozy, family-owned restaurant tucked away in a quiet Seattle neighborhood. The place had a comforting warmth to it, the soft hum of conversation, the clinking of silverware, and the smell of fresh coffee and sizzling burgers floating through the air. For the Johnsons, it wasn't just about the food, it was about togetherness, unwinding, and sharing stories from their week. Sophie, a bright and curious little girl with a heart full of wonder, loved these dinners more than anything. She would swing her legs under the booth, eagerly waiting for her favorite meal, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with a side of mashed potatoes. To her, this wasn't just food, it was a part of her childhood, a small but meaningful ritual that made her feel safe and happy. Michael, a hard-working and practical man, found solace in these moments, a brief pause from the daily grind of managing finances and responsibilities. Emma, an aspiring artist who had put her dreams on hold to raise Sophie, loved seeing her daughter's excitement over something as simple as a plate of food. In a world that moved too fast, these Sunday dinners reminded them to slow down, to appreciate life's small joys. That night, as Sophie happily munched on her meal, she glanced outside the large diner window. The warmth inside contrasted sharply with the cold, lonely world beyond. On the curb, under the dim glow of a street lamp, sat a man, thin, hunched over, and clutching a crumpled paper bag. Sophie's small heart ached with a feeling she didn't quite understand yet, but she knew one thing for sure: he looked hungry. Sophie couldn't take her eyes off the man sitting outside the diner. He looked cold, lonely, and most of all, hungry. His worn-out jacket barely seemed to keep the evening chill away, and the way he clutched the small, crumpled paper bag in his hands made it clear that whatever was inside was all he had to eat. Sophie watched as he slowly unwrapped what appeared to be half of a sandwich, carefully picking at it, as if trying to make it last as long as possible. The sight stirred something deep inside her, a feeling she couldn't quite name, but one that made her chest feel tight. Her parents noticed her sudden quietness. "Sophie, sweetheart, everything okay?" Emma asked, brushing a loose strand of hair from her daughter's face. Sophie pointed toward the window. "Mom, who is that man?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. Emma followed her daughter's gaze and sighed. She knew there was no easy way to explain homelessness to a 6-year-old. "He's just someone going through a hard time right now, honey," she said gently. Michael, ever the practical one, added, "Yeah, he's down on his luck. But don't worry, sweetheart." But Sophie wasn't worried, she was thinking. She looked down at her plate, then back at the man outside. Her little fingers played with the crust of her sandwich as a thought bloomed in her mind. Her mother always said that kindness was like a ripple in a pond, it spread further than you could see. And right now, Sophie wanted to create a ripple of her own. "I want to give him my sandwich," she announced suddenly. Emma's eyebrows lifted in surprise, her coffee cup pausing midair. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" she asked gently. Michael frowned slightly. "Sophie, you don't have to do that. You love peanut butter and jelly." But Sophie was already nodding, determination shining in her big brown eyes. "He looks hungry, Daddy. And I can eat mashed potatoes instead." Michael exhaled and exchanged a look with Emma. There was hesitation in their expressions, but also something else: pride. Their little girl, barely 6 years old, had a heart big enough to see beyond herself. Emma smiled, smoothing Sophie's hair. "All right, sweetheart," she said softly. "But be careful, okay? Just hand him the sandwich and come right back." Grinning, Sophie carefully slid out of the booth, gripping her sandwich tightly in her small hands. As she pushed open the heavy diner door, the little bell jingled softly, announcing her presence. A cool breeze brushed against her cheeks as she stepped outside. Up close, the man looked even more tired than she had realized. His clothes were frayed, his beard unkempt, and his shoes barely holding together. For a moment, she hesitated. Would he even want her sandwich? But then she took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Excuse me, sir," she said in her sweetest voice. The man flinched slightly, as if startled. Slowly, he lifted his gaze, and for the first time, Sophie saw his eyes, deep, dark, and filled with something she couldn't quite place. "I brought you my sandwich," she said, holding it out with both hands. "I think you're hungry." For a long moment, there was silence. The man simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Sophie wondered if she had done something wrong. Maybe grown-ups weren't supposed to take food from kids. But then, something unexpected happened. The man's lips quirked into the smallest, most hesitant smile. His rough, calloused hands reached out, gently taking the sandwich from her tiny fingers, as if it were the most precious thing he had ever been given. "Thank you," he said, his voice deep but warm. "You're very kind." Sophie beamed. "You're welcome. It's my favorite. I hope you like it." And just like that, she had created a ripple. The man sat there for a moment, staring down at the peanut butter and jelly sandwich in his hands. His fingers, rough and weathered, traced the edges of the bread as if it were something fragile, something rare. He hadn't expected this. He had spent weeks living on the streets, blending into the background, becoming just another face that people passed without a second glance. He had seen it all, the hurried steps, the averted eyes, the silent discomfort of those who saw him but pretended they hadn't. But this little girl, this bright-eyed 6-year-old with no idea who he was, had looked at him differently. She had seen him, truly seen him, not as a burden or an inconvenience, but as a person. And in that moment, something in him shifted. Keanu Reeves let out a quiet breath as he looked up, watching Sophie skip back toward the diner, her golden curls bouncing with each step. The little bell on the door jingled again as she disappeared inside, her family waiting for her with proud smiles and warm embraces. He had spent the past few weeks preparing for a role, immersing himself in an experience he could never fully understand but wanted to grasp, even if only on the surface. Playing the part of a man without a home had been eye-opening. He had seen kindness, yes, but he had also seen indifference. He had felt invisible in ways he never had before. And yet, here he was, sandwich in hand, feeling something he hadn't expected, genuine warmth. For years, Keanu had been known for his humility, for his quiet generosity, for being the kind of celebrity who never let fame change him. But in all the years of admiration and praise, he had never felt as truly seen as he did at this moment, by a little girl who didn't know his name, didn't know his movies, didn't care about the millions of people who adored him. To her, he was just a hungry man in need of a meal. He smiled to himself, the smallest chuckle escaping his lips. He had been given extravagant gifts before, luxury cars, rare memorabilia, the finest meals money could buy. But this simple sandwich, handed to him with pure, unfiltered kindness, meant more than any of them. The world had a way of hardening people, of making them cynical. But not Sophie. At 6 years old, she already understood something that many adults had long forgotten, that kindness wasn't about recognition, and generosity didn't require wealth. Keanu tightened his grip on the sandwich, his mind already made up. He couldn't let this moment pass without acknowledging it. He had the power to change lives, not just in the grand ways Hollywood expected of him, but in the small, meaningful ways that mattered most. That night, as he sat alone in his hotel room, staring at the untouched sandwich, he made a decision. Tomorrow, he would find Sophie again. And he would make sure that the kindness she had shown him didn't go unnoticed. The morning started like any other in the Johnson household. The smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen as Michael poured himself a steaming cup, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Emma stood by the sink, helping Sophie get ready for school, brushing her golden curls as the little girl hummed happily to herself. The memory of last night was still fresh in Sophie's mind, how she had given her sandwich to the hungry man outside the diner. She felt good about it, like she had done something important, though she couldn't quite explain why. Then, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't loud or urgent, just firm and polite. Still, it sent a small ripple of curiosity through the house. Visitors weren't common this early in the morning. Michael glanced at Emma, who shrugged before wiping her hands on a dish towel and making her way to the door. When she opened it, she expected to see a neighbor, maybe a delivery driver. Instead, a sharply dressed man in a tailored suit stood before her, holding a sleek black briefcase. He had the air of someone who was used to making important visits, but there was a warmth in his eyes that softened his professional demeanor. "Good morning," the man said with a polite smile. "My name is Henry Carter, and I represent Mr. Keanu Reeves." Emma blinked. She wasn't sure she had heard correctly. "I'm sorry, you who?" Hearing the name, Michael stepped forward, his brows furrowing in confusion. "Wait, Keanu Reeves? The Keanu Reeves?" Henry nodded, his smile unwavering. "Yes, sir. Mr. Reeves asked me to visit your family personally." He glanced down, and for the first time, noticed Sophie peeking from behind her mother's legs, her bright eyes wide with curiosity. "And especially you, Miss Sophie." At the mention of her name, Sophie tilted her head, intrigued. "Me?" "Yes," Henry said with a chuckle. "You see, last night, you did something very special. Mr. Reeves was incredibly moved by your kindness, and he wanted to personally thank you." Emma and Michael exchanged bewildered glances. This had to be some kind of mistake. Why would Keanu Reeves, a world-famous actor, a man who had everything, take an interest in their little girl? It was just a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I don't understand," Emma admitted, shaking her head slightly. "It was just a small gesture. To you, perhaps," Henry said kindly. "But to Mr. Reeves, it was much more. He believes that acts of kindness should never go unnoticed. That's why he would like to invite you all to meet him in person today." Sophie gasped, bouncing on her toes. "Really? I get to see the popcorn man again?" Michael choked on his coffee, while Emma placed a hand over her mouth, trying to process the surreal turn their morning had taken. Henry let out a quiet laugh. "Yes, Miss Sophie. If you're available this afternoon, Mr. Reeves has arranged a private meeting. He has something very special planned." The weight of the moment settled over them. This wasn't just an invitation, it was an extraordinary, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Michael, ever the cautious one, crossed his arms. "And this isn't some kind of publicity stunt?" Henry shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. Mr. Reeves values his privacy, and this is a personal gesture. No cameras, no press, just gratitude." Emma hesitated, still trying to wrap her head around everything. But then she looked down at Sophie, at the excitement sparkling in her daughter's eyes, and she knew there was only one answer. She turned back to Henry and smiled. "We'd be honored." Henry inclined his head. "Wonderful. I'll send a car to pick you up at 3. Dress comfortably." With that, he handed Emma a small envelope before bidding them farewell. The moment the door shut, Michael let out a breath, shaking his head in disbelief. "Well, that just happened." Emma opened the envelope with trembling fingers, revealing a handwritten note in smooth, elegant strokes. "Dear Sophie, you reminded me of something very important last night, that even the smallest kindness can mean everything. I would love to meet you again and thank you in person. I hope you'll accept this invitation. With gratitude, Keanu Reeves." Sophie traced the letters with her little fingers, grinning up at her parents. "Mommy, Daddy, this is so cool." Michael chuckled, still in shock. "Well, sweetheart, I think you just became best friends with Keanu Reeves." And just like that, the countdown to 3 o'clock began. The Johnson family spent the next few hours in a whirlwind of excitement and disbelief. Emma carefully chose Sophie's outfit, settling on her favorite blue dress with tiny white polka dots, while Michael, still trying to wrap his head around everything, opted for casual slacks and a button-down. They had no idea what to expect, but they knew one thing for sure: this was a day that would change their lives forever. Right at 3 p.m., a sleek black SUV rolled up in front of their modest home. The car looked out of place on their quiet suburban street, drawing a few curious glances from neighbors. Henry Carter stepped out and opened the door with a welcoming nod. "Shall we?" Sophie practically bounced into the car, her excitement impossible to contain. "Are we really going to see the popcorn man?" she asked, swinging her legs as she settled into the plush leather seat. Henry chuckled. "Yes, Miss Sophie. Mr. Reeves is very excited to see you again." The drive through the city felt surreal. Seattle's skyline gleamed under the afternoon sun, but the Johnsons barely noticed. Their minds were racing, their hearts pounding with anticipation. Emma stole a glance at Michael, who was staring out the window, deep in thought. He had never been one to get swept up in celebrity culture, but even he had to admit, this was something different. This wasn't about fame or fortune. This was about kindness, about a single moment that had unexpectedly rippled into something extraordinary. The SUV pulled up in front of a sleek, modern building in the heart of downtown. Its towering glass windows reflected the city's vibrant energy, and for the first time, Emma felt a small knot of nerves tighten in her stomach. She reached for Michael's hand, squeezing it gently. This is really happening. Inside, the lobby was warm and inviting, filled with the faint scent of fresh coffee and polished wood. A receptionist greeted them with a warm smile before pressing a discreet button on her desk. "They've arrived, sir." Within seconds, an elevator door slid open. Henry gestured for them to step inside. "Right this way." As they ascended, Emma stole another glance at Michael. His face was unreadable, but she could feel the tension radiating from him. She squeezed his hand again. "It's okay," she murmured. He let out a breath and nodded. "I know. It's just surreal." With a soft ding, the doors opened, revealing a stunning penthouse suite bathed in golden light. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased breathtaking views of the city skyline. The space was luxurious, yet lived in, elegant, but not cold. And there, standing by the window, hands casually tucked into the pockets of his jeans, was Keanu Reeves. He turned toward them with an easy smile, his dark eyes warm and familiar. He was dressed simply in a navy sweater and jeans, nothing flashy, nothing screaming Hollywood. He looked, for lack of a better word, normal. But to Sophie, he was still the man who had needed a sandwich. "Lily," he said warmly, stepping forward. "I was hoping I'd see you again." Sophie beamed, completely unfazed by the moment. "Hi, Popcorn Man." Keanu chuckled, crouching slightly so he was at her eye level. "Popcorn Man, huh? I like that." Emma and Michael, still struggling to process the sheer impossibility of the moment, finally found their voices. Emma stepped forward hesitantly. "Mr. Reeves, this is unbelievable. Thank you for inviting us." Keanu straightened, waving a hand dismissively. "Please, call me Keanu. And the pleasure is all mine. Your daughter reminded me of something very important last night, something we tend to forget in this world." Michael, ever the skeptic, finally spoke. "And what's that?" Keanu's expression softened. "That kindness doesn't have to be grand to be powerful. That sharing something small, like a sandwich, can mean everything." Sophie tugged at his sleeve. "Are you really not homeless?" Keanu smiled, shaking his head. "No, I was practicing. I've been preparing for a role, and I wanted to understand what it felt like, even just for a short time." Michael crossed his arms, still skeptical. "So this was research?" Keanu met his gaze, unflinching. At first, yes. But then I started seeing the world differently. You think you understand struggle until you experience it firsthand. Even in a small way. That night, I wasn't a celebrity, I was just another man on the street. And your daughter, without knowing who I was, treated me like a human being. Not an inconvenience. Sophie nodded, swinging her legs. Well, you looked hungry. Keanu laughed, genuine and full. That I was. Then, as if remembering something, he turned toward a small table by the window. Sitting atop it was a large, carefully wrapped box. He lifted it and handed it to Sophie. I wanted to do something for you, he said, his voice gentle. Something to say thank you. Sophie's tiny hands eagerly unwrapped the gift. As the paper fell away, she gasped. Inside was a set of the finest art supplies, brushes, paints, colored pencils, and a thick sketchbook with her name engraved in gold on the cover. Her eyes widened as she traced the letters with her fingers. This is for me. Keanu nodded. I heard you like to draw. I thought you could use something special to create whatever you imagine. Tears welled in Emma's eyes as she watched her daughter clutch the sketchbook to her chest. This is beyond generous, she whispered. Keanu turned to her, his smile kind. Kindness deserves to be acknowledged. Michael, still in awe, finally let out a breath and shook his head. Well, Keanu, you've officially left us speechless. Keanu chuckled, leaning back against the window, gazing at the family before him. Good, he said with a grin. Because this is just the beginning. Sophie was still marveling at the beautiful art supplies in her hands, running her small fingers over the golden letters of her name on the sketchbook. To her, this was more than just a gift, it was an invitation to dream, to create, to see the world in colors and lines that only she could imagine. Her face beamed with excitement as she looked up at Keanu. I'm going to draw so many things with this, she exclaimed, hugging the sketchbook tightly. Keanu chuckled, crouching down to her level. That's exactly what I was hoping for, he said warmly. I can't wait to see what you create. Emma and Michael were still trying to process everything. It wasn't just the generosity of the gift, it was the thoughtfulness behind it. Keanu had taken the time to learn about Sophie's love for art, to find something that would truly mean something to her. But then, Keanu turned to Emma, his expression shifting into something more serious yet still kind. I actually have one more surprise, he said, nodding to Henry, who stepped forward and handed Emma a small envelope. Emma hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened it. Inside was a letter, official, elegant, and stamped with the seal of one of Seattle's most prestigious art academies. As her eyes scanned the words, her breath caught in her throat. It was a job offer. Her knees nearly buckled as she looked up at Keanu in disbelief. I don't understand, she whispered. Keanu's voice was steady, reassuring. I heard you used to be an artist. That you put your dreams on hold to take care of your family. Well, I think it's time you get to chase them again. Emma's eyes welled with tears as she looked back down at the letter. It wasn't just an offer, it was an opportunity she had long given up on. She had spent years supporting Sophie's creativity, encouraging her daughter to draw, paint, and dream. But somewhere along the way, she had let go of her own artistic ambitions. Michael, still in shock, leaned over to read the letter, his eyes widening. This is real, he murmured, rubbing the back of his neck. This is unbelievable. Keanu smiled. You've spent so much time investing in others. I think it's time someone invests in you. Emma let out a shaky breath, pressing a hand to her chest. I don't even know what to say. Keanu met her gaze with quiet sincerity. Say yes. She let out a watery laugh, shaking her head in amazement. How did you even do this? I just opened a door, Keanu said simply. You decide whether to walk through it. Emma's hands clutched the letter tightly as she looked over at Michael, who gave her a small nod. She turned to Sophie, whose eyes sparkled with excitement. "Mommy, you should do it," Sophie said eagerly. "You always tell me to follow my dreams." Emma laughed through her tears, pulling Sophie close. "You're right, sweetheart." She turned back to Keanu, her voice full of gratitude. "Yes. I say yes." Keanu grinned. "That's what I was hoping to hear." Michael, finally letting go of his initial skepticism, let out a low chuckle. "Well, Keanu, I think you just changed our lives." Keanu shook his head. "Sophie already did that. I just gave it a little push." As Emma held the job offer close to her chest, she realized something: this wasn't just about art. This was about believing in herself again. And that was a gift she would never forget. The days that followed were a whirlwind of excitement, reflection, and quiet gratitude for the Johnson family. The moment Emma officially accepted the job offer, everything seemed to shift. The prestigious art school welcomed her with open arms, thrilled to have someone with her passion and talent join their faculty. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose beyond being a mother and wife. She was stepping into a dream she had once let go of, now reignited by an unexpected twist of fate. Michael, ever the pragmatist, had spent years believing that hard work was the only way to get ahead. He had never been the type to believe in luck or miracles. But now, he wasn't so sure. He had watched how a single, small act of kindness from their daughter had set off a ripple effect that changed everything. He had always tried to teach Sophie about kindness, but now he realized she was the one teaching him. And then there was Sophie. Her new sketchbook went everywhere with her. Every spare moment, she filled its pages with drawings, of her family laughing in the kitchen, of flowers in their yard, of the stars outside her window. But her favorite drawing was one she worked on carefully, paying attention to every little detail, a picture of a little girl handing a sandwich to a man sitting on the sidewalk. When Keanu visited them again a week later, Sophie couldn't wait to show him. "That's you," she said proudly, pointing at the drawing as she handed it to him. Keanu studied the picture, his smile softening. "That's us," he corrected gently. Sophie beamed. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the Johnsons sat together on their porch, reflecting on how much their lives had changed in such a short time. Michael sipped his coffee, gazing at the sky. "You ever think about how different things would be if Sophie hadn't shared her sandwich?" Emma nodded, staring at the sunset. "Every day." Michael chuckled, shaking his head in amazement. "I guess it's true what they say, one small act of kindness really can change the world." Sophie, curled up in Emma's lap, yawned sleepily and looked up at them. "Mommy? Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart?" Emma asked, brushing a strand of hair from Sophie's face. Sophie's eyes fluttered as she fought sleep. "Do you think Keanu has enough sandwiches now?" Emma and Michael exchanged a glance before laughing softly. Michael leaned in, kissing the top of Sophie's head. "I think he has plenty now, sweetheart." As Sophie drifted off to sleep in her mother's arms, the Johnsons sat in comfortable silence, letting the weight of the past few weeks settle over them like a warm blanket. They weren't rich. They weren't famous. But they were happy. And that, they realized, was the greatest gift of all. Because sometimes, the smallest acts, sharing a sandwich, offering a smile, believing in someone, are the ones that change the world the most. Life had a funny way of coming full circle. For the Johnsons, what started as an ordinary Sunday night at a small diner had turned into something extraordinary, something life-changing. A single moment of kindness from a 6-year-old girl had set off a chain reaction that none of them could have ever predicted. Emma, once a woman who had quietly tucked away her dreams, now found herself standing in front of a classroom filled with eager young artists, guiding them toward their own creative journeys. She had forgotten what it felt like to wake up with excitement, to feel purpose beyond the daily routines of life. But now, she was rediscovering it, one brushstroke at a time. Michael, a man who had always relied on logic and practicality, had softened in ways he never expected. He no longer dismissed the idea that small moments could lead to something bigger. He had seen it with his own eyes, how one selfless act from their daughter had transformed not just their family, but perhaps even Keanu Reeves himself. And then there was Sophie, the little girl who had started it all. She continued to carry her sketchbook everywhere, filling it with drawings of the world as she saw it, full of color, wonder, and infinite possibility. When she looked back at the moment she handed a sandwich to a stranger, she didn't see anything special. She just saw what kindness was supposed to be. Keanu Reeves had told her that kindness doesn't have to be grand to be powerful. And Sophie had proved that sometimes, it's the smallest gestures that leave the biggest impact.